China and the California exodus and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark The Millennials. We have no millennial other than our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins. Welcome. And also Adam Couture, our producer. But today we have a special guest. It's Rick Manning of Americans for Limited Government. Welcome, Rick.
Hey, thanks, Mark. Glad to be on.
Really glad that you're here. So this podcast is called China and the California Exodus, which is a big deal right now, of course. There's an exodus from most blue states, but especially California. And of course, the dumbest bill in America. And I got to tell you won't believe how incredibly dumb it is. And it's directly related to the exodus from California. And Rick Manning, our special guest today of Americans for Limited Government, was born and raised in California. So what better person to talk to about this issue than Rick Manning? So first up, you lead Americans for Limited Government. What is it?
Well, it's just about what it sounds like. Every single day we wake up, when we identify things that are expanding the size and scope of government, we try to beat them. We don't pick issues that everybody else is doing. You know, there's 1,000 groups in D.C. talking about taxes and stuff.
Of course.
And the fact is, they win or lose based on who's in power, and it doesn't have anything to do with their own guile. We pick issues that are hard issues, like zoning. There was Obama tried to get local zoning taken over by the federal government, by HUD. And we fought that. We got the Congress to defund the implementation of it. And President Trump, last month, 2 months ago, ended that regulation.
And he's an expert. Obviously, Trump is an expert in this subject matter
on zoning,
because he's a developer.
But once again, the swamp is pretty deep, and we had to fight the people at HUD tooth and nail. Even though Ben Carson was the secretary, the bureaucrats at HUD wanted it. It was a power grab by them to be able to determine. They literally were going to look at census maps, census tracts, to determine if you were engaging in racist behavior based on the demographic makeup of your neighborhood. That's what they were going to do.
So Americans for Limited Government fought against this and
we stopped it.
Obscure kind of issue, but incredibly important issue because it affects where you live.
It affected every single place that takes federal money for community redevelopment grants. So it was almost about 2,000 jurisdictions in America would have had their zoning being determined by HUD. And it was already expanding under Obama. If Hillary had won, it would have been expanded into the education department, where your monies would have been determined by where your schools were. The transportation department was looking at it to try to tell you what kind of roads you should build and where you should build them. So all in all, you take a lot of money from the federal government. And the Obama administration, the incoming Hillary administration, if we had made the mistake of doing that, was intending on having a full takeover of local prerogatives by the federal government. And that's why we talk about limiting the size and scope of government, because while local governments oftentimes get it wrong, the fact is when they get it wrong, like at Berkeley, for instance, when they get it wrong, it doesn't affect me living somewhere else. But when the people from Berkeley move to DC and they get it wrong, it affects everybody.
Absolutely.
And so that's why we try to localize craziness as opposed to allowing it to be expanded nationally.
So with this takeover of the local zoning control by the federal government that your organization, Americans for Limited Government, was fighting against and has successfully defeated, what were they trying to achieve specifically by the takeover of the Obama administration? So let's say they took over local zoning. What would they do next?
Well, what they were trying to do is they were going to put multifamily houses into single-family neighborhoods. They were going to essentially forcibly integrate communities. An example that actually occurred was they tested this in Chicago, and they moved about 1,000 people out of the projects in Chicago and built projects in Davenport, Iowa, which is within 150 miles of Chicago, and so it was considered to be in the metropolitan area of Chicago. And so suddenly Davenport, Iowa had 1,000 people who were living in the inner city of Chicago, and they were in Davenport. But the real crazy part about this, Mark, is the Clinton administration did a study about it many years ago. They did about 15, 18 years ago. And the study was to determine whether or not people did better when that occurred. And so they did an experiment. They moved a certain number of people into what is considered a middle-class neighborhood from a lower-class neighborhood. And then they tested, and they watched them over time, over an 18-year period, and they tried to determine, Are these people doing better or are they not? Well, they had to get the conclusions redone because the initial conclusions of the study, before they told them to go back and come up with the answer that they wanted, the initial conclusion was that they weren't doing any better or worse being in a different neighborhood than they would have otherwise. The only thing that they saw benefit from was they had lower incidence of diabetes. Okay? That was the one benefit that existed out of it, was the lower incidence of diabetes. And that was a Clinton study designed, because the left plans ahead. They planted this seed 20 years before with the idea that at some point, next time they were in charge, and by the way, Hillary was supposed to be in charge. Next time they were in charge, they were going to have the study that was going to show them that, we definitely needed to dismantle the suburbs.
And what was the reason for it? What was the
there's a theory that racism, that basically it was a Fair Housing Act issue. They were using the Fair Housing Act and said, well, we are determining that based upon outcomes that there is systemic racism.
Okay.
And so it goes to the whole systemic racism thing, and it's outcome, so it becomes outcome based. They say there doesn't have to actually be anybody engaged in racism. There doesn't have to be discrimination as to who you sell your house to. There doesn't have to be any of those things. There doesn't have to be laws on the books making it so there is racial separation. All it has to do, they have to look at, it's an outcome based. They look at a census tract. They look at a census tract and they say, too many white people, too many black people, too many Hispanic people, too many Asian people, or too many men, too many women, or whatever they want to determine them to be. And they go off and they say, well, because of that, we're going to make changes because clearly the outcome indicates there was racism, even though there's no racism that's apparent in any way, any place in the system. That's what they were doing.
Unbelievable.
And oh, by the way, the Supreme Court said it was okay for those kinds of decisions to be made based on that.
Which Supreme Court said that? Which?
It was 6-7 years ago.
Okay, 6-7 years ago.
And
so
it was a Texas.
recent.
Yeah, it was recent. The Texas court. It was a Texas case, and they said that you could use outcome-based determinations, but that couldn't be the majority. It had to be just a part of the equation. It couldn't be. You still had to have a majority finding that there was actual definable racism. And they expanded that immediately and said, well, gee, we're going to use outcome-based determinations to actually determine that racism is there. It's called, the legal theory is called disparate impact. Not that anybody cares about that.
So I'm just curious because conservatives believe that people should have more of an opportunity at the starting gate of life. And perhaps the way you get there is through school choice because someone who does live, let's say in a project, doesn't have an opportunity to go to a better school. They're stuck in the local public school,
Correct.
Which more often than not is really bad. But Democrats are more interested in the outcomes being equal. And therefore, they want you to just not have to do...
They don't care if the school is crummy or not. They care whether or not everybody has to go to a crummy school, okay? They don't want excellence. They believe everybody should have equal, that outcomes should be equal. Now, let me give you, the school choice issue is really interesting because there's a senator, a junior senator from California, who very publicly chastised her running mate for president, who's running for president, Joe Biden, at a debate about his support for basically voluntary choice on school busing. The irony is she told her story, and she grew up in Berkeley, by the way, and her story is as follows. She was a little girl. Her parents got divorced. Her mom moved to a part of town that wasn't the best part of town. It was right at the beginning of the busing movement, and so Berkeley installed a voluntary busing system, and young Kamala Harris, was because her mom said, I want her to go to a better school, got on a bus by choice, not by force, by choice.
Unlike what she said.
Got on a bus and went to a better school. And she credits that with her capacity to be a U.S. Senator and now the vice presidential candidate. So anytime you hear that story, I want people to understand, Kamala Harris benefited from school busing choice from choice, the exact kind of choice that people on the right are pushing here in the inner cities in DC and elsewhere. And guess what? The only thing in their budget, in the Biden-Harris budget that they want to cut, is the DC school choice program, which allows people in DC to have a choice on whether or not they're going to go to a private school, a better school, versus going to the school that they happen to have the misfortune of living in the district of. And Kamala Harris herself benefited from the exact choices that Republicans are trying to provide everyone else. She benefited from it, but she doesn't want
to really help people at the starting gate of life.
And exactly right. It makes sense.
Isn't it amazing? It's the other person that's had that too, which is interestingly enough, who had a better opportunity with a private school is Nancy Pelosi. Because Nancy Pelosi went to a private Catholic school in the city of Baltimore. Now, to be clear, they had to pay for that out of pocket because
they're wealthy.
Because her dad was the mayor of Baltimore.
Right.
And I think most podcast listeners have no clue that Nancy Pelosi actually grew up in Baltimore City, and her father and her brother were the mayor of Baltimore. But interestingly enough, the only reason why I bring this up is because the school that Nancy Pelosi went to was so impacted by this pandemic, it just closed.
Really?
And it closed permanently.
Ooh.
And it was an all-girls school. And Nancy Pelosi's comment was, "Oh, that's a shame." So rather than actively allowing people in the poorest part of the cities, including the place where she grew up and had a better opportunity because of that private school and that opportunity at the starting gate of life, she herself says, "Oh, no one else should have that. They get to be stuck in those really crummy public schools where they live and just suck it up."
Well, they probably should have taught more on the catechism, and maybe she'd be a better legislator. But
oh yeah, but she's so prayerful of the president.
I'm
yes.
sure. I know we know what she's praying.
So true.
But yeah, I mean, this is that's just one thing that we've done. There's a lot of other things, but the bottom line on it is we pick issues that are big issues that matter that maybe nobody else is paying attention to, because. You can be one of 1,000 doing something and, okay, maybe you make a difference, maybe you don't. But when you find issues like that, like the attempt, Obama succeeded, I stopped him for 2 years, but he eventually succeeded in giving away the internet protocols to ICANN, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, and essentially turned it over to world governance rather than having the United States control the protocols in terms of IP protocols. And in doing that, it's actually the naming conventions. In doing that, there was a tenuous tie to First Amendment rights on the internet because the government
that's huge
had a piece of the pie. They owned it. When they gave away the piece of the pie that the government owned, at that point, it was all private, and there's no First Amendment, and eliminated the First Amendment ties to the internet. And so and we fought it like crazy. We got it defunded twice through Congress. And I will tell you, the Republicans basically decided that they were going to give in to Obama on it and the last budget, Obama's last budget. And, I knew I was in trouble when I had every single Republican come out on my side publicly, because that's the sign that they're now all publicly on your side. So now they say, "Oh, we couldn't stop Obama."
Yeah, right.
We stopped him for 2 years, and unfortunately we weren't able to finish the job. Those are the kinds of things nobody knows about that stuff.
Incredibly important issues, but issues that they're not shiny and bright.
Right. You do shiny objects all the time, but the fact is you want to spend your time on the issues that matter, and that's why China matters, quite honestly.
Yes. So let's segue into China, because this podcast, of course, is called China and, of course, the California exodus.
An obscure housing policy.
That's right. Very obscure housing policy. So Americans for Limited Government deals with a lot of different issues, of course, and you're the head of that organization. So let's talk about China. One of the issues that you're really concerned about and that you're an expert on is the social credit scoring. What is that?
Well, okay, that's something that's really interesting, and it's scary because it can happen here. China has the ultimate cancel culture, because what they do is they monitor everything you do. And they use surveillance equipment from companies that that we actually invest our money into and make a profit off of these companies that are surveilling the Chinese people. And so, like as we know that we see, that we get strange things pop up on our Facebook or Google or wherever, where we get ads, we say something in our house and suddenly there's ads up and we go, wow, that happened. Well, China takes that to like 100 times more intrusive. They are a communist country. They do not have individual liberties. So they do, and what they do is they monitor everything you do. And if you do things that the government approves of, you're able to book cheap airline tickets, train tickets. You're able to get better food.
What?
You're able to get all these different things. In
What?
fact, literally, people who get bad social credit scores are limited in the kind of food they can get. They basically are put on let's put it this way, a very low-cal diet. You can buy potatoes and carrots maybe, but you can't buy meat. Okay, so they literally dictate every aspect of your life. So you go up to the grocery store, it's not like here, you go up to buy something and they say, no, you're not allowed to. And if the person sells you something they're not allowed to buy, now obviously they have a lot of markets and stuff there on the street, they're kind of wild, wild west stuff. But if you're going through a regular market, you face tremendous problems. And on the travel,
So how would the market know what your social credit score is when you go there to buy?
Well, if you're using any kind of electronic or any kind of credit card or other currency, if you're not using cash, they would know.
So that's built into the credit system.
Yeah,
So you go there to swipe your card, they're like, oh, well, your credit score is really bad. So
you swipe your card and they say this is, and maybe that only rings up the things that are allowed to be purchased, and you can't pay for the other stuff. By the way, you also have, no matter if you keep doing the same work.
I mean, that's totalitarian. Yeah, that's not just communism. That's pure totalitarianism, like Big Brother.
And another thing they do with it, it's pretty straightforward. Yes, it is. Since all the money is, you don't have private enterprise, they dictate, if you get bad social credit scores, your salary goes down. Doesn't matter what you produce. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what value you provide to the world. None of that stuff matters. What matters is, are you somebody who the state wants to reward? And so if you happen to be,
and that's about the speech issue, really. It's about what you're saying
about
the regime.
It's what you're
posting.
What you're posting. If you're meeting with the wrong people, if you're part of a church, if you're not a government sanctioned church.
So your social credit score goes down because you are a devout Christian?
Yes.
What?
Well, in fact, you go to jail if you can go to jail for having the Bible. So it's the Chinese church, by the way, is the fastest growing Christian church in the world. So just to put it in perspective,
China
in China is the fastest growing Christian church in the world.
So Christianity, as we know it, is the fastest growing religion in China.
Christianity, as Jesus knew it, is the.
Okay.
I don't know the Christianity.
Just want to make sure
there's not Christianity as we know it. I don't think it resembles us.
You mentioned that China was okay with giving you a good social credit score if it was the right religion.
Well, it's actually, if you go to a government sanctioned church the Roman Catholic Church is negotiating with China what that will be. It means you have monitors in there. You have Chinese government monitors in there. You're only allowed to say certain things. There's only you are only allowed to preach on certain topics, and so it is a heavily censored experience. And quite frankly, it's not where the Christian church is growing. The Christian church is growing in home churches, in people who are being oppressed, who are looking to God, looking to Jesus as an answer to the oppression, as the hope.
They're looking for meaning because they're so subjugated.
Meaning and hope.
Yes.
And so it doesn't resemble the U.S. church at all, where you have the 75 churches lined up on Main Street, and it's and everybody can go and we can choose to go or not. There, because there's a real penalty for going. There's a real penalty for doing it. They literally will take books of the Bible. They will not have all 66 books of the Bible together at once. Each house will have one book, and they'll read it and they'll exchange it around, just like in the original church where there were letters that were passed around, copied and passed around throughout the world before the printing press, and the explosive growth and the belief in God and the Christian church that occurred back at the beginnings.
Isn't that one of the dangers? It's interesting that you brought that up because no kidding, this has always been a huge concern of mine about the information age where all information transfers from books to online and people rely exclusively what is online because what is online can also be taken down. And so my question to you is, in a surveillance state and a totalitarian state, communist state like China, it seems like the only reliable information that you can get in terms of knowledge and truth is the printed book that is passed around.
Yep.
And I'm talking about science books, I'm talking about Enlightenment age books, these kinds of things, as opposed to going online because obviously you can't. Can you Google democracy online and learn more about it in China?
Well, in China, your Tiananmen Square doesn't exist. Okay, you can't find it. Okay, because remember, but this seems like it's crazy, but think about it. Here in America, we're busily tearing down statues because we don't want to know about the past. We don't want to be reminded of the past. We don't want to be able to have a communication about what happened, why it happened, the debate that occurred, and all of those things. We don't want to understand our own history because somebody says, oh, well, I'm offended by it. Well, that's no different than wiping Tiananmen Square out of the Chinese lexicon. It's no different from disappearing 50,000 Hong Kongers. That's what's happening right now in Hong Kong. It's no different from any of those things because once we destroy our history, who's going to tell it? Once you make it so the founding fathers where the basic DNA of America no longer exists, and that is all men are created equal, endowed by their creators with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the DNA of America. Okay, were we perfect from the beginning? Are we perfect now? No, because we're not perfect. But the DNA of America is that all are created equal. That doesn't mean that all have an equal outcome. What it means is people have equal opportunity, and the government cannot put their thumb on the scale in favor of person A versus person B for any reason. That is, now they can pick person A to do a job because person A has an engineering degree and person B has a degree in, political science. That's so they can make those distinctions, but the distinction is not supposed to be the color of your skin or your ethnicity or your creed or your religion or any of those things or your sex. The distinction is supposed to be your merit. And quite honestly, this idea that we should all have equal outcomes is an idea that is patently false. And it's false because what it says is that, Mark, you worked really hard. You figured out how to build cell towers and be able to use radio waves in crazy ways to allow people to communicate. And I'm a political science major, okay? I talk for a living. And so somehow, you provide a service that is necessary for communication in the modern world, and me not so much. So it's I use it. Thank you very much for it. But we should both have the same house. We should both have the same. Everything should be dictated to us. We should have rows of all the same bungalows should be everywhere. And it doesn't matter if you're working or not. It doesn't matter if you did anything of value or not. Everybody should have the same outcome because that's what the left says. And that's why socialism and communism always leads to the lowest common denominator.
Which makes them so similar, which makes the left in America, especially the progressive left, where they're heading and where they are today, it makes them so much like China in terms of at least their objectives. And I'm not even sure they understand that that's where they're taking us. I think so many people,
the people are leading it, do know.
Do you think they know?
The people are leading it, no.
And they're okay with that.
Well, what's really interesting is you can go to a founding of our country. Yes, they are. Because ultimately somebody always has, here's the key. If you hold the gun, you have the power, which means you're the government. The government in China is very wealthy. The people who run the government are allowed to run the companies, and like they're very wealthy.
Of course.
Jack Ma, who was Alibaba, very wealthy. Okay, so he's not living in a squatter's hut, because when you control the system, you are the beneficiary of the system, and it has nothing to do with your ability, has nothing to do with anything except knowing the right people. So it is ultimately the exact opposite of what all the left tries to say is, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Our system is, it's what you know.
Yes.
Their system is, it's who you know. Because the only thing that matters is, are you hooked into the right people in the Chinese Communist Party?
And our system is also, are you willing to do the work?
Are you willing to do the work? Exactly right.
And are you willing to
take the risk?
You brought out an example before. I mean, I know so many people who, to their credit, worked 6-7 days a week and 14-hour days, and we hear this all the time. But see, the left doesn't think that that is virtuous. They don't think that work is a virtue anymore, and that is so foreign to me, because I'm from a blue collar background, and it was always inculcated in me by my parents that you can get ahead, but it's going to depend on you, and it's going to depend on how hard you're willing to work. It's not going to depend on who you know. It's going to depend on what you know combined with how hard you work.
Yeah, and this here's the critical piece on it that most people don't know, because most people want to sit there and America needs to read the story about the Pilgrims. Okay?
Why?
Well, because very simply, the Pilgrims came here, and the first government they instituted was, we all share. We're all going to share.
It's going to be a socialist government.
It's going to be a socialist government.
Like a commune.
It was a commune.
Okay.
We're all going to share. And the first year, when nobody worked the fields because it was hard, nobody planted the seed because it was hard, they starved and they died en masse. And the second year, they said, we're not doing that anymore. We're giving you private plots of land and go out and
feed yourself.
You have to do the community garden, but you're going to do the private plots of land also. And guess what? They no longer starved. And so we, at the founding of our country, in 16,
the implication being what?
The implication is, if you just sit there, no matter what your moral tenor is, if you sit there and you say you're doing it for the common good and you have no stake in the game, you don't do it. And the people who were working and trying to make certain there was food in the first year with the Pilgrims, they sat there and they looked around and said, how come my neighbors aren't working? And so they stopped working as hard and they starved. I mean, let's just be clear. It's what you see everywhere where this system gets put into place. And people then have to effectively be enslaved in order to produce based upon the common good. Whereas in a capitalist system, in a free enterprise system, you have an incentive, you have a stake in the game. You know, there's an old saying, and it's just obvious. People don't, if they rent a house, they don't mow the yard. Okay? They don't keep up the place. That's the job of the person who owns the place. But when you own the place, you mow the yard, you paint the fences, you do the things you're supposed to do. You might trick somebody else into painting your fence if you're Mark Twain, but you do the work on your house because it's yours. There's ownership. Exactly. And that's why free enterprise works and Marxism fails. Because unless you have a stake in the product, it never, ever, ever works.
But the left in America, they seem to have a lot. For example, the Squad, AOC as an example. You see, these are the young up and comers, if you will, in the Democrat Party. Right. And you look at this and you say to yourself, what is it about the former Soviet Union? What is it about China? What is it about Cuba, a place that is literally frozen in time and hasn't progressed at all? What is it about Venezuela that they just fundamentally don't understand, that they nonetheless want to take us in that direction?
Okay. Well, it's called hubris. Everybody thinks that, they just didn't do it right. And the United States is so wealthy that it's impossible to believe that we could end up becoming essentially a nation of slum dwellers. It's inconceivable. We're so wealthy that we take it for granted. And so people who never had to create any wealth, people who have, essentially been taught in school that gee, wouldn't it be nice? And they probably grew up listening to John Lennon's Imagine. People who are in that ilk, and people. The fact is, I don't blame people for discovering, basically, told this through an education system that has failed, and that quite honestly, people of my generation have failed the younger people by the fact that we've allowed the education system to not tell the American exceptionalism story, not tell why this place matters, and not tell the simple fact that more people have been brought out of poverty by free enterprise, by capitalism, than by any other economic system in the world. Freedom equals wealth. And the more you have the government, which produces nothing except for exercising power, the more you have the government dictate outcomes, the less free you are, the less wealth you're going to create.
So I'm just curious with that example, which of course, obviously I completely agree with. In China, where you have had an increase in personal income significantly over the past 30 years, is there some sort of intelligentsia in China of the average person who realizes that they really don't own anything and there's no protection from the government if they just happen to like certain things that the government doesn't like and that can be taken away from them? Is there any kind of rising tide, that's my question, in China of people who are trying to seek freedom?
Yeah, we see it in Hong Kong, where they were scheduled to be part of China after 75 years, and China fast forwarded by 35 years by taking over, enforcing Chinese law, Beijing law on Hong Kong. So you see it there. The answer, though, is a little more complicated, and China, the left will hold China up as an example of a communist country that's thriving. There's a simple reason they're thriving: our dollars. What people don't realize is that your investment funds that you put into your investment accounts, your pensions, are invested in China. They're invested in companies that use child and slave labor. They're invested in companies that engage in forced organ harvesting. Get this, Mark, forced organ harvesting. They actually do something that is so beyond belief that it's really hard for people to understand it. They take people who they view as being dissidents or troublemakers or the wrong religion, and the only right religion is the state. They take them and they put them into a medical facility. They hook them up onto tubes. People from all around the world, wealthy people from all around the world, will go and schedule a kidney transplant. Here in America, what you have to do is, if you need a kidney transplant, you're on a list.
You're on a list, a wait list.
You wait list. And sometimes people get bumped to the top of the list and people say, oh, well, that's not right. But essentially you have to wait for somebody to die that has the specific kidney that fits you.
Yes.
And that's how it works. Or somebody to donate one kidney, since we have two of them, who has a specific kidney that's right for you.
Okay.
In China, you can go to China and you can schedule that and say, well, I need a kidney, and so I'm going to head over there in 3 weeks, and can you have a kidney ready for me? And what they do is they have people who they are literally keeping alive so they can harvest their organs.
Oh, that's disgusting.
It is disgusting.
But are you also saying that there are people from the West who go there to China specifically to have an organ transplant? Do they know, these people from the West, do they know that it's...
Well, it's not necessarily from the West. There's a lot, it could be wealthy people in Indonesia and anywhere.
Understood.
But yes, the fact is they do know, because you'd have to be a moron not to understand that they don't have organs ready on demand sitting in a certain place where you go to get your transplant done. So yeah, they have people kept alive in specifically so they can harvest their organs, and once they're emptied out, they let them die. Okay,
that's just disgusting. I mean, that's probably one of the greatest human rights abuses of all time, because it's the use of modern technology and the totalitarian state, combining them to keep certain people alive and literally pulling the plug on others.
But I will tell you what the real problem is. The companies that do that, American investors from all over the world invest in them. Your portfolio is invested about 5 to 7%. If you've got an average portfolio, it's invested in China. If you've got an emerging market fund in your portfolio, it's probably between 25 and 50% Chinese.
So the American people are invested in this nonsense.
American people are effectively the slave holders. We are the profiteers off the slaves because Wall Street has put us into these companies. And understand, any investment in China is investment into the Chinese Communist Party. When a company becomes big and profitable, the Chinese Communist Party immediately puts members of the Politburo on their board of directors, assigns people from the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, which is their military arm, puts those people into their companies, because ultimately every single company in China is required under law to serve China's interests. That's why when you sit there and use TikTok, and let me tell you, this is a really example. When you use TikTok, this is not investing in, this is use of, and it's a little bit different. So let me finish the investing. Go to divestchinanow.org. It's something I run. I'm running an effort to divest America from China. There's lots of things that can be done. We can get the U.S., our private retirement accounts out of it. We can get government accounts out of it. We can get the Maryland state government out of it. There's a lot of things that can be done. So go to divestchinanow.org and learn more about it and sign the petition. And I'm trying to pull $250 billion out of China right now by getting our private retirement accounts out of Chinese assets.
That would be huge.
And
Game-changing.
It's a game-changing because it forces Wall Street to then create non-China emerging market funds, which means with your non-retirement accounts, you can say, I don't want to be in China, at which point we effectively then have a choice whether or not we want to be slaveholders or not. And I think America as a whole will say, no, I don't want to invest in forced organ harvesting. I don't want to invest I don't want to have child and slave labor profiting off of it. And when we do that, supply chains move, everything changes in terms of the ability for communist China to exist. So they're propped up by the answer to why is China so successful? Because they're propped up by us. We prop them up.
But the American people, I don't think, even know this.
No, they don't.
That's
why we're doing this.
Absolutely. And if they did know it, they would be saying, thank you. Let's get the heck out.
Well, they'd be looking at their labels when they're Christmas shopping, if you're allowed to do that this year. They're looking at the labels and they're saying, I don't want to buy something from China. And so they're putting the items back on their shelf and they're telling the store owner, I don't buy Chinese stuff because they use slave labor to do it. Your Christmas ornaments are produced by child and slave labor. Okay, your electronics produced by child and slave labor. This isn't me. This is the U.S. Department of Labor annual report on child and slave labor around the world.
Our own government is telling us.
Our own government. There's 12 different industries in China that use child and slave labor. And so when you sit there and you buy that Christmas ornament, the little trinket that has made in China on it, chances are an enslaved Christian made that ornament.
So when the Democrat Party talks about reparations in various states across the country, maybe the real conversation should be we're actually engaging in indirect slavery or servitude because we're buying products from people that are making our products in a slave market.
And find a Democrat who will stand up to China. It's really hard because Joe Biden's son has made a lot of money off of China.
Oh my gosh, it's disgusting.
And Kamala Harris's husband, he works for DLA Piper, and his whole business as an attorney is running the China operation. So he's both exporting our jobs to China and importing, getting Chinese goods imported here and creating capital flows for China. So the Democrats have two people who are financially tied at the hip to the Chinese Communist Party.
It's the most ridiculous thing. And here's what drives me crazy. I don't think the American people have a clue. I don't think they have a clue as to how epic this battle is right now between China and the United States, because the battle with the Soviet Union was a battle with a country with a big gas can and a big military, but a really, really small economy. That's not so with China.
And well, that's not so with China. Russia's Mexico with nukes. Okay, that's what Russia is. China, we have created the Chinese economy. In the last 20 years, since the permanent normalized trade relations went into effect, something which Joe Biden voted for, since that went into effect, we have seen our manufacturing sector cut in half, being shipped off to China. We've seen our supply chains go where we are completely dependent upon China. We've seen our medicines, as we've seen during this COVID crisis, completely dependent upon China for
That
prescription.
has been the wake-up call.
And dependent upon China. And you know the export we get from China? A virus.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. So we're going to leave it at that. Look, we have to have you back to talk about China more because this is probably, and I mean this sincerely, the most substantive conversation we've ever had on Mark the Millennials about China. And it's incredibly helpful. But next up, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Assistant Producer? Of course. And here it is. And it's the dumbest bill in America, which is causing the great California exodus. Yes, there's a massive California exodus because of all the taxes and all the craziness in California and all of the interruption of commerce in California. And this dumbest bill, which is causing that California exodus in part at least, comes out of the Berkeley City Council, and it's called the Healthy Checkout Ordinance. So the Healthy Checkout Ordinance, get this, means exactly what it says, which is in Berkeley, the City Council, Berkeley, California, the City Council passed an ordinance that stops and prohibits grocery stores from selling junk food and sweet beverages at the checkout counter. And instead, this city council in Berkeley, California requires those grocery stores to replace the sweet and candy and sugary items with healthy ones instead. And it goes into effect next year in 2021, but it was just passed this year in 2020. So the person who is the big mover and shaker in the Berkeley City Council to want this is Councilwoman Kate Harrison of Berkeley, California. And she, Kate Harrison, was interviewed by KPIX, which is a CBS affiliate, and there's a reporter, his name's Don Ford, and he has interviewed her. We have a series of clips on that. We're going to discuss these clips with Rick Manning because Rick is a former Californian. He's part of that great exodus from California. And first up, here's the clip. Here it is.
You know you want it, that last little impulse buy at the checkout stand, that candy bar or that soda. City of Berkeley says they're going to put a stop to that. It's a temptation too strong to control, they say. Something had to be done.
Last night, the Berkeley City Council unanimously passed the Healthy Checkout Ordinance, the first in the world, to require that food right near the cash register be healthy choices.
Starting next March, stores larger than 2,500 square feet must have only wholesome food for you to look at while waiting
So
to check
there you
out.
go. So good old Councilwoman Kate Harrison is telling those big bad stores that they're selling sugary things at the checkout counter, and that's really bad, so they're going to stop them. So this is part of the great exodus from California because every jurisdiction in California, including, of course, the state of California itself, they keep passing these laws. I think here's what I think is happening. They're running out of things to do. They're running out of new ideas. So they're coming up with ideas that now reach into the inside of your business and where you put things on shelves. I mean, have you ever heard anything this crazy? Rick Manning, former Californian?
Well, actually, no, but it's not that far different from the snack tax that Maryland considered and other states have, because ultimately what they're trying to do is they're trying to dictate behavior, and they want to force you to do what they want you to do, and it doesn't matter if you need a candy bar because you're diabetic. It doesn't matter what's going on. It's bad for you because they determined it. Because you're not smart enough to know that when you look at the label and it's 240 calories, that you don't really need the 240 calories on the Milky Way because you're just too dumb to know that. And oh, by the way, you're also not responsible enough because after all, if you die 5 years earlier because you smoke a cigarette or you do something really crazy like that, you of your own. You don't have a right to do that because your life is theirs.
It belongs to them.
It belongs to them, and they justify by saying, we pay for the health care. Well, no, you shouldn't be paying for the health care. That's why we got to stop socialized medicine. That's a different story.
So KPIX, which is the local TV station in Berkeley, California, the reporter, Don Ford, continues to ask Councilwoman Kate Harrison of Berkeley, California, about her ordinance. And he challenges her, of course, like most reporters, they don't challenge Democrats ever, really, truly. But we have a clip on that, the next clip, and here it is.
Who are you to tell me what I can buy and not buy?
You can buy anything you want. You just can't buy it within 2 feet of the cash register. So it's right behind you. If you really want that thing, go ahead.
So the healthy checkout ordinance, actually, it was unanimously approved by the Berkeley City Council, and it requires stores that are over 2,500 square feet, which is pretty much all of the stores that sell groceries, that is, that at least 25 square feet of healthy items must be sold within a 3-foot radius of the checkout register. Do you know what's interesting about this? Is food companies, including candy companies and soda companies, they actually pay for that space.
Right.
So yeah, they're selling their stuff, and you think that, oh, no, it's the grocery store that's ordering it and deciding it to put it there, in part, but it's also because these manufacturers of candy and so forth actually pay an affirmative dollar amount to rent the space.
The reason you have low cost for your groceries is because General Mills pays to have Cheerios on an end cap, and they pay money for placement. They pay money to have it on the third row where your eyes see it, as opposed to on the top row where it's hard to reach. The placement in stores matters, and they charge for it. And oh, by the way, that's why you pay less money at the register. So when you sit there and they take away one of the places that you can actually make money in a store, it's not the price of candy that goes up, it's the price of everything that goes up. And that is the untold story about how grocery stores actually work, is they sell their space. Imagine that. It's like, think if you're a landlord, okay? And you got this beautiful place right on the bay, and you got another one that's like a little dinky spot that nobody wants to be. Okay, are you going to charge the same amount for those two spaces? No, you're not. You're going to charge a lot more money on the.
Some real estate is more valuable than other real estate.
And in a store, real estate that is on the bottom shelf and the top shelf is less valuable than real estate that's on the middle shelves. And real estate that's on the end caps is more valuable. And real estate that's on the register. Do you think that the sugar they provide you in the magazines that are sitting there, that are really bad for your brain, do you think that they're put there because, gee whiz, we think that somebody wants to have those magazines? No, they pay for the spot.
So Kate Harrison said in a local paper when interviewed, she said, placement of unhealthy snacks near a register increases the likelihood that customers will purchase those foods and drinks when willpower is weak at the end of a long shopping trip. That's what she said, City Councilwoman Kate Harrison. It's like, I'm sorry, you have to pass a bill for this? Do you have nothing else to do in Berkeley, California than to micromanage how businesses operate in Berkeley?
Well, maybe she should have taken a clue that since this is the first in the world, that maybe everybody else rejected as being stupid. It's but she's very proud, first in the world. Well, there's a lot of really bad ideas that were rejected by a lot of other people, and it doesn't make you first; it may make you the dumbest.
Absolutely. So she continues to say, Kate Harrison, the councilwoman from Berkeley, she says in this article, the idea of healthy checkout is that it offers parents more opportunities to say yes to their kids. And it also helps us to re-envision what treats are. So that was also said by Holly Schneider, a member of Berkeley's Sugar-Sweetened Beverage Commission. They have a commission on Berkeley on sugar-sweetened beverages.
Everybody needs a government. Everybody needs a government job, Mark.
So, it's about, you don't want to say no to your children. That's the classic liberal thing. So I said this the other day. So what we should have is, instead of chocolate bars and Milky Way bars, as you said, we should have trophies. So it's, I'm sorry, I'm going to say no to the candy bar, but here's a trophy.
But it wouldn't be fair because some trophies are shinier or better, and so that wouldn't be fair. So you have to make certain that all the trophies, no matter what, are all cost the same, or better yet, are free. So everybody can get a trophy. In fact, they ought to take the non-disposable bags, the ones that have all this, that end up having all the COVID in them and are really dangerous right now. They ought to take those non-disposable bags and they ought to include a free trophy with every purchase so the child has something to walk away with and the parent can say yes to their children.
So like General Mills and the cereal, a free trophy. You won.
The next time a kid spends his time his or her time in the in the vegetable aisle, sitting there looking longingly at a radish, will be the first time. So they are. So let's just put those radishes up there, and you'll guarantee that nobody buys anything from those spots. By the way, what will end up what you would do, and it's anybody who's had a kid knows this. How every single parent has had to deal with kid who's sitting on the floor in a grocery store crying because they want something.
Yes,
typically.
exactly.
You know, when I was a kid, there were
and they want to eat it that second too.
When I was a kid, there were toy sections, little toy sections, and there were like plastic soldiers and and airplanes and stuff like that. And you know, my mom told me when I was 16 that I had to get up off the floor and quit crying over that balsa.
Oh, you were 16.
Balsa with airplane. It was, you know, that I had to give it up.
So you know what? This is part of what's causing the Great California Exodus. Because we're calling this dumbest bill in America, really, it's the Great California Exodus, which is what the Berkeley Healthy Checkout Ordinance is helping to cause. Not solely, we know that, but it's the cumulative bills that are coming through the state of California and all the local governments and local counties and so forth that are pushing through these ideas. They have run out of ideas of bills that really do help people's lives, and they've decided to just cross that line and try to dictate every aspect of human life. You're a former Californian. What are you hearing about this big exodus?
Well, first of all, I was a trendsetter. I left in '84. I want to make it clear that when I left there, you had all Republican government, and it was still a paradise. So I left. The people I left behind, I entrusted it to. They screwed it up. Okay, so let me be clear. Not my fault. But here's the thing. Yes, people are moving from California. People are moving from California because of high taxes.
The crazy politicians.
And the crazy politicians. I'll just give you a simple example. And this is baseball, okay, because I'm a big California Angel baseball fan.
Oh, boy.
Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, whatever they're called these days. And they have this player named Mike Trout. And Mike Trout is the best player in Major League Baseball. And so Mike Trout signed a contract. It was like $36 million a year. Why did he get that much money? He's the best player in the history of baseball. Okay, so he gets paid a lot of money. Fans want to see him. So
that's not fair. There's not an equal outcome there.
It's not equal outcome. Here's what Mike Trout, because he signed with the California Angels, pays 13% state income tax. If he signed with the Florida Marlins, he'd pay 0%.
Zero.
He signed with Texas in one of the Texas teams, 0.
Zero, right?
But California set up a system which makes it's not good enough to get Mike Trout's money. Okay? If you play a baseball game and you happen to play for the Texas Rangers and you come to Anaheim and you play against my Angels, the players on the Texas team have to pay for that one game check 13%.
Oh my gosh.
Of their check.
My gosh.
And so now that's good news for Mike Trout because when he goes to Texas, he doesn't pay any. But it's bad news if you play for the Texans or for the Rangers, because not only do you have to live in Dallas, but you also have to pay 13% when you play in Oakland or
even when you're playing outside the state.
You're paying outside the state. And so that's how California gets you, whether or not you're actually live there or not. They find a way to tax you.
So what's interesting is I actually heard on TV recently, as a California realtor, and the realtor said that he sells a house or she sells a house. They go to closing in California. And unlike most closings in most states where the buyer ponies up the money, usually it's a mortgage company that's ponying up the money, and that money goes to the settlement agent and then the money is dispersed. In California, and then by the way, then the realtor gets their commission from the settlement company. In California, the settlement company actually takes out from the realtor's commission the income tax that is owed to the state at that particular time. In other words, the state is so hungry for revenue.
Independent contractors are treated like they are in fact employees and get their contract, their money.
That's second
withholding immediately.
Whereas most states, it's the end of the year, or
you pay estimated taxes
15th.
every quarter. You pay estimated taxes every quarter based on that, and it's California also.
But that would be quarterly. In California, they want it that second.
California also passed a law which made Uber drivers and Lyft drivers into employees.
They're employees, which is absurd. They're not employees.
Well, they're not employees, but not only that. Uber and Lyft are now saying we're not going to do business in California. So,
They shouldn't.
I think about it. The entirety of the gig society, the gig employment society, where you're able to go off and do an Airbnb, you do all this kind of stuff, is based upon the brilliance of the internet and the capacity to exchange product information. And so you can actually turn your car, if you need to have money to feed
into
your
a small
kid,
business.
you can turn your car into a small business and supplement your income. You have to pay taxes on it, but you pay as an independent contractor. In California, you're not allowed to. In fact, they discovered that that's a problem.
They're trying to do a lot of legislative fixes
and
now.
They're trying to do legislative fixes because there's all these people who are in the gig economy who are now really mad because they don't have their gig anymore. And it's and guess what? Those people, quite honestly, many of them probably voted in the very people who took it away. So it's their own darn fault.
So get this. So Berkeley, California, we're talking about the healthy checkout ordinance, and we're talking about Berkeley, California City Councilwoman Kate Harrison. I just want you to hear this, Rick, because you know about all these crazy politicians in California. We have a final clip from Kate Harrison where she talks about why she was running for Berkeley City Council. And she, of course, puts some really interesting soft Marxist language in there, which, of course, they actually are quite serious about this, this whole Marxism thing in Berkeley, but I think actually statewide in California. Listen to this clip and you'll see.
Why am I running is to continue the progressive movement that we started in Berkeley. Berkeleyans embraced a progressive agenda, not just a set of policy ideas, not just a bunch of policy prescriptions, but an idea of who's in charge of the city. Is it private developers? Is it private interests? Or is it us?
Yeah, those pesky private interests,
Private interests, yeah. That's like the voters. Yeah. They have private interests because they don't want to pay all their money to taxes and they want to drink a big soda and they want to be able to get a candy bar once in a while. And peanuts might not be that good either because somebody might be allergic to them. So we've got to eliminate everything from the snack aisle. They're totalitarian.
Too stupid.
They're totalitarian fools. And quite honestly, that's where Haight and Ashbury Street are, where the drug culture started. And unfortunately, many of those people never left. Now they're on the city council.
Well, you should have seen the people in the audience when she was announcing why she was running, because they all looked really like concerned, but at the same time, they looked like dazed and confused.
They just came from Haight and Ashbury, the corner of Haight and Ashbury.
So let's hear some final thoughts on why there is a great California exodus. We've told the podcast listeners about this stupid bill in Berkeley. But just what is your gut on this? Final thoughts.
A lot of Californians grew up in rural environments. They want to keep their money. They're actually not insane, and so they are moving to places like Idaho, Arizona, Texas, and they're moving en masse right now. My sister just moved to Arizona, and she moved for a very simple reason. She loves California. She moved for a very simple reason. The taxes were out of control, and they kept telling her what to do. And she said, I'm not going to live in an environment where I have to pay a lot of money to be told what to do. And it's
perfect.
So she left.
Perfect. And that is the last thought on Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to Rick Manning of Americans for Limited Government. Fantastic podcast. And of course, our producer, Adam Couture, our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, and our website. See you next time.